As in much of the city, news from Dorchester is dominated by the urgent focus on structural racism, but also by efforts to balance reopening with vigilance around the pandemic. To bring us up to date is the managing editor and publisher of the Dorchester Reporter, Bill Forry. Bill, thank you very much for once again taking the time to join us.
Thanks, Chris. Good to see you again.
So I want to start with the reopening because this is a pressing issue for people, whether you're in the restaurant business or you've got kids who really ought to be in summer camp. So how's that going?
Well, Chris, it's going. It's happening. We're seeing more restaurants come online, both indoor now as well as outside on the patios. There are restaurants on Dorchester Avenue and on Adams Street that have moved out into the street, that have been allowed by the city to take parking spaces and cordon them off with barriers and put tables there. It's happened at the Banshee. It's happening in Lower Mills this morning at Sweet Life. It's happened in Adams Corner at the Industry. It's happening at Cesaria's on Bowden Street, which is reopening for indoor dining this week. We expect maybe even today. They're actually building an outdoor patio for the first time in the rear of their building. Cesaria's is an excellent Cape Verdean restaurant on Bowden. So we're starting to see parts of the community, business-wise, start to reemerge in phases here. And then another important thing for many of us here in the neighborhood with children and teenagers is that the organizations we count on here to help take care of our kids are starting to come back online in person in July. So we're starting to get word from the Boys and Girls Clubs of Dorchester. They expect that they're going to be welcoming some of their members back in person in July, maybe as soon as July 6th, in an outdoor kind of way, like setting up tents outside, having the kids in the play areas again under supervision with camp counselors. So it's not at full capacity, however, and it's going to be phased in over the summer. So the Dorchester YMCA is planning the same. Some of the city summer camps are only going to be virtual. So it's a mixed bag, but another important restart that's happening next week is Dorchester baseball is going to resume or begin its season on some of Dorchester's playing fields starting on Monday. The coaches and the league organizers have been reaching back out to parents to let them know. Practices are actually starting up this week, and the kids will be back with gloves on their hands and bats in their hand, playing each other, which was something that we weren't sure was going to happen at all, but that is going to happen starting next week here in the neighborhood.
Yes, I want to ask you about what happened just yesterday with the city budget. There was a push for some more dramatic reforms that fell short as far as the votes. You actually have, I think, 4 city councilors who live in Dorchester, and I think they broke in different ways on this. Can you tell me a little about your coverage on that?
Sure, Chris. We actually just moved a story today on yesterday's council vote. It was 8-5 in favor of the Walsh administration's various budgets. I should say the main budget, the operating budget, was 8-5. And yes, there were councilors who including Councilor Andrea Campbell, who represents District 4, which is Dorchester and Mattapan, parts of Dorchester and Mattapan. Councilor Campbell was a no vote against the budget. So was Councilor Mejia, who is one of the new at-large councilors and lives in Dorchester. And then Councilor Baker, who is District 3, voted for the budget, along with Councilor Anissa Sabi George, who also lives in the neighborhood. So yeah, there's a split there. However, the budget did pass, and really the argument for passing this budget made by the 8 councilors was that they were really seeking to prevent any layoffs. This budget, according to the Walsh administration and the councilors who support it, is going to allow the city to move ahead without layoffs at the moment, at least. There will be some trimming going on costs for sure. But the councilors who voted against it, including Councilor Campbell, she called it a business as usual budget in unprecedented times. And they were pressing for more in the way of for things like trimming the police overtime budget. Councilor Arroyo, who also represents Mattapan, along with Councilor Campbell, made the case that there's just they haven't used this opportunity, this unique moment of focus on policing. That isn't showing up in the budget the way they had hoped. They wanted to see a 10% cut in police budget overall, and to reallocate some of that funding into other human services mainly. And that doesn't appear in this budget to the extent that they wanted. There is movement, and the mayor had already announced this. He is trimming some police budget and transferring funds, specifically overtime funds, into other programs. But it was a fascinating discussion yesterday. At the end of the day, this budget will go forward, and there'll be more clarity now for city departments, which we're concerned about what exactly are they working with even for the summer. So we now know this budget has been passed.
Well, it might be difficult to come up with a full plate of reforms that would fit into a budget within such a short time, because the fiscal year ends within a matter of days.
Yeah.
But I can also see here that the councilors are doing this, at least the 5 votes against the budget, because they have no other leverage.
Right. This is their one shot during the year to really affect policy in the form of budget. They can hold hearings throughout the year, and they will. There'll no doubt be more hearings, and I would say there will be some tinkering with spending priorities throughout the course of the year. But yeah, this is the big kind of opportunity every year, and it typically doesn't have this sort of dissent, at least not 5 votes. It's illustrative of this new council. It's a much more activist council, much more progressive council, and but yet there were progressives who voted for this budget. Let's be clear. People like Councilor Liz Breeden from Brighton, Alston Brighton, who's the new councilor. She's been very strong progressive voice already on the council. She was a yes vote. Lydia Edwards from East Boston, who has been at times a strong ally of Mayor Walsh, but also at times a critic, made an impassioned case for passing this budget. And so that debate really is fascinating, and it's not binary here in terms of the conservative wing and a progressive wing. There was a split there too.
Speaking of debate, we've had the national debate about racism and anti-racism over the past month or plus, and you've had a lot of that in your own paper. Can you tell me a little bit about your sense of mission around that?
Yeah, Chris, I mean, we always want to be a platform for diverse voices in our newspaper, meaning people who write in and comment and write columns and letters to the editor. We've seen a big surge in that lately, and it's great. We're getting it from different quarters, particularly people who really want to make the case for reforms to policing and law enforcement and human services in the city. This week, I was very pleased that 2 of our city councilors, Frank Baker and Andrea Campbell, both wrote very thoughtful pieces, I think, about kind of where we are specific to policing, and how Councilor Baker wrote that, very, very strong words in his support for Black Lives Matter. And yet also made a case for it not being mutually exclusive, that he also supports the Boston Police and policing in general, but understands the need for reform. And I think that I give Councilor Baker credit for taking that issue on. In his words, he's sometimes seen as a more conservative, Walsh loyalist, etc. But he has his own viewpoints and his own his own strong feelings on the subject, and he represents a good chunk of the neighborhood. So we were happy to have his voice. Andrea Campbell, who has been really outspoken in a forceful a voice for change in policing in the city so far in this debate, has a very important op-ed that we ran today. It's online at .news.com right now, in which she outlines her plan for reform in the BPD. Last week we had Representative Liz Miranda, who outlined her legislative initiative to change how policing is done across the state. So we've really been fortunate to have our leadership here at the city and state level using the Reporter and .news as a way to convey that message to the constituents. And we're obviously thrilled too that our readership is responding as well and writing in their own thoughtful critiques. Jeff Klein from Dorchester People for Peace wrote an interesting piece last week. Bill Walczak, who's been one of our columnists of the last 6 months or so, has been terrific in analyzing ways that things could change in policing here in the city. So yeah, we're happy to be that one of the platforms that people are turning to.
Well, we should finally mention, Bill, that if people want to tap into more of this, and I'm sure there will be more to come, what's the best way to follow?
Yeah, people can follow us on Twitter @.news and plug into our stories that way, or just go to our website, .news.com. And of course, you can find us in print. We're all over the neighborhood in Dorchester and Mattapan at newsstands and at stores and restaurants.